what do you think that exercise is going to do for my triceps that 680 just didn't? You know, and so that kind of ties in a little bit to, you know, I spent the last 14 years of the sport in my training at Westside Barbell. And it was when it was on Dimmer, so it was a small place. And we did what Louis told us to do. And, you know, we trained our weaknesses and stuff like that, but for the most part, you know, we all learned from him. He taught us how to teach each other. So when I'm asked that question, you know, it's kind of like asking me, what would I change if I could go back during those times based upon what I've learned right now and do differently? And you would think that it's a lot. You really would, you know, and that I've learned a lot. And I have learned a lot. But what I've learned is it's different. It's, you know, what I've learned isn't all powerlifting focused to get ready for that next meet. You know, what I've learned's been more, you know, health, conditioning, you know, weight loss, fat loss, muscle building, hypertrophy, you know, a lot of the things that weren't that important to me at the time when it was all 100% strength based. So I can sit here and say that, yeah, I may have done the accessory work different, and to be able to understand this answer, you need to be able to understand how we were training at the time. And the 8 Keys article, which is on elitefts.com, explains that pretty thoroughly. But essentially we did our, you know, our core exercise, which was a max effort or dynamic effort exercise first. Then after that, we did what I call a supplemental exercise, which was the main exercise to build that, to help build that core exercise. And then everything that followed after that were accessories. So if I was to change anything, it would be how we trained our accessories, because everything else cycled. Everything else had waves on how it would cycle. You know, the max effort wave would be 1 to 3 weeks. The dynamic wave could be anywhere between 3 to 5 weeks. The supplemental movements may change every 1 to 3, sometimes 4 weeks. You know, it depended upon what the movement was and how long you could keep breaking records with what you were doing. And the accessory exercises really didn't change a whole hell of a lot. I mean, it was just kind of the shit we threw at the end. You know, shoulder raises and band push downs, and it's just shit we felt that we had to do, but there really wasn't a whole lot of thought, you know, kind of put into it. You just did what everybody else did or whatever you thought you needed to do, because for the most part, the training's done. You know, you're just trying to train the stabilizers and, you know, train other body parts to help from getting injured. But when I think back and I look at that, I see that a little bit as a gap, you know, as something that we could have, knowing what I know now about muscle building, hypertrophy, you know, we could have, I guess a great example would be, and I wrote an article on this, it's called Supplemental Exercises, or if you just search Dave Tate Supplemental Exercises, there was an hour-long seminar video attached to the article. But an example would be dumbbell rows that we throw at the end of the training. You know, not as a second movement, but just dumbbell rows essentially just to work your lats. You know, looking back, you know, doing 150-pound dumbbells for 15 reps or whatever the hell I would do, just slamming the shit up and down, it wasn't working the lats anywhere near as effectively as what I could work the lats now if I was using, you know, a 70-pound dumbbell and really focusing on trying to get the muscle to stretch and getting a good contraction. Theoretically, when I look back, I think to myself, the lighter dumbbell would have actually developed more muscle, would have increased the range of motion a little bit more, which I think was lacking with us some, at least with me, because powerlifting essentially is a short range of motion sport with everything that you're doing. You're trying to shorten the stroke on the squat, bench, deadlift, across the board. So it would have opened some joints up that I think, weren't being worked through the full range at the time. And I wouldn't have lost anything strength-wise because we weren't really doing them for strength in the first place. But, and this is where there's that big pause at the beginning, what I did worked. It worked for me. And it worked really well for me. And it worked for everybody else who was in the gym. So who am I to say that if we would have changed the way that we did accessories, it was going to work better? You don't know. So I don't know. I do change it with the people that I work with now and give advice to. I don't see the point of training those type of accessory movements, balls out super heavy and putting all that wear and tear on the joint when it's just being done to help build muscle, when there's other principles you can use to build muscle, which are going to be less strain on the joints, which you've already pounded to begin with. A takeaway from that is I once heard George Halbert, who was he held multiple world records in several weight classes for the bench press. Somebody asked him after he did a 2-board press in the gym with something ridiculous, like 680 or some shit like that. And then somebody came up to him and said, George, what are you going to do for your triceps next? And George's answer was, what do you think that exercise is going to do for my triceps that 680 just didn't? And so that kind of ties in a little bit to, you do those heavy things like that, which are real demanding on the joint, then you got to really understand why you're doing the movement you're doing. Is it for muscle building, or is it for strength, or are you just going to shotgun it and say, hell, it's for both? But if you can and that's fine. A lot of people do just shotgun it. It's for both. You need both. But if you're going to separate it in your mind, and that's the way I did in mine, is towards the end of the workout, it became more hypertrophy based. If that's going to be the case, then I see value in taking the wear and tear off of the joints. But would it have worked better? I don't know. I advise it now when I speak to people. Is it working better for them than it did for the lifters that I was back then? I don't know. And the reason I don't know is I don't like working with people who are at the pro level. It's nothing against the people that are at the pro level. I'll do anything to help them out. Most of the issues are going to be technical, or they need to back off a little bit. I actually know that better than I do know training beginners, but I'd rather help people at the intermediate level that are trying to get to that next level than trying to help, an absolute beginner or a pro guy. So we were all at the top of the game at Westside at that time. So it's comparing apples to oranges for me to sit there and say that it works great with these intermediate lifters when we were all advanced lifters. I can't make that comparison with that. Obviously, things have changed over the years that Louis has implemented with Westside Barbell, and what those things are, that question would be better directed towards him. But I do definitely think that would be a question he should be asked, and anybody who speaks to him should ask, how are you training differently now compared to how you trained pre-2005? Because we all kind of got a little fucked up. Now, I think a lot of it was our mentality. It's we trained too hard. We didn't back down. We were told. I'm not gonna sit here and say Louis was an enabler. He was telling us to back down. We just chose not to. I think he has guys now that actually are listening to him a little bit more from that regard. But he doesn't have the injuries that we did when we were in there. So obviously he learned from it. So he would definitely be the person to ask in that regard. And I do not want to sit here and speculate. I do think I know some of the reasons, but I do not want to sit here and speculate or try to speak for somebody else. I won't do that. So that would be a question for him, and a very good one to ask.